Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I am so delighted today to have as my guest, Ayana Carroll. Ayana, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I am so looking forward to our conversation. I loved our initial call and all the things I learned about you and the wonderful work that you're doing. And I want to give a special shout out to our mutual friend and colleague who has introduced us, Chris Salem. He's just a wonderful individual and podcast host himself, and he's been on my show as well. So thank you to Chris for this great introduction to Ayana.
Yeah, Chris is awesome.
He is. Ayana is the founder of ARC Consulting, and she's dedicated to elevating Black mid-level professionals into transformative leaders. With over 25 years of human resource leadership and DEI expertise, Ayana specializes in breaking down barriers to leadership, including limited access to high visibility projects, mentorship gaps, and challenges in self-advocacy. As the first Black professional to rise to the level of Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Fluence, Ayana created and led the company's first DEI department. This pioneering initiative established pathways for diverse hires, increased representation and leadership, and drove inclusion at all levels. Ayana has extensive experience coaching C-suite leaders as well as mid-level managers, creating tailored learning paths to accelerate their development. She also is passionate as a volunteer with various homeless organizations to support individuals on their journey to stability and success. Ayana, speaking of journeys, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about your own journey into this world of leadership.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the intro service. Service is the thing that is my ministry. Initially, I had imagined and took the steps to become an employment attorney. I wanted to work in the corporate space as that employment attorney, but I quickly realized that it seemed unbalanced and unfair, meaning that the corporate had money and they had power and they had influence that employees didn't necessarily have, and that there was an unequal balance of power. So if an employee were to fall or do something that was wrong, or you made a mistake in their corporate space, employers had all of this knowledge to try to get them out of the business if they wanted to unionize, whatever it was that an employee base wanted to do. It just felt unbalanced, and I didn't like that. I'm a person who strongly believes in fairness and consistency, and I didn't like that. So I needed to figure out a way that I could balance that power, and HR felt like a good spot for me to be in. Now, 25 or so years ago, it wasn't called HR, it was called personnel. So, but it felt as if that was the way that I could represent both the employer and the employee. So that's how my journey into HR started. It's the only thing that I've ever done, and I loved it. And I have worked across multiple functions in HR, from talent acquisition to learning and development, to compensation, to benefits, and then all the way up to vice president of HR and the chief diversity officer. So my journey along the way was one that was filled with all sorts of learnings and impact and developing folks along the way. So that's how I got into my HR journey.
Hmm. That's so interesting. The realization that you had about being driven by your sense of fairness. And I totally relate to that. And how that directed where you decided to focus your attention, your expertise, and instead of pursuing the legal route, but
Right.
going where there might be someone that might be perceived as an underdog that you could be of service to and help in a more direct way. And that kind of ties in with what your focus is in your business right now. This mid-level managers and especially Black professionals. What is it that you noticed happening with those individuals that caused you to say, yes, that's where I want to really concentrate my focus?
Yeah. Mid-level managers are the operators. They generally do the work, right? They are the day-to-day. Yes, the executives have the bulk of the responsibility and the buck stops with them. But mid-level leaders do the work. They are the operators. They shoulder everything that goes on in a corporation at particular stages. And they have the proven ability to execute. But they often struggle with visibility. They often struggle with self-advocacy. They often struggle with uh, being seen and having the ability to say, to raise their hand and say, I want more. I want to do more. I want to grow more. I want to be a leader. And they're not given that opportunity to do that. Particularly Black and people of color don't necessarily have the option of doing that. So when I think about mid-level leaders, I think about the people who are actually in the fire doing the work. And if we took that knowledge that they had and we elevated them, gave them the tools that they needed to be able to grow in their careers, then we could be so much better as companies. And then when we don't do that, we lose that knowledge. We lose the historical knowledge that those operators have. And there is a gap in there. So I really want to focus on growing leaders. So, how do I become a leader? What does that look like? What are the kinds of conversations that I need to have? What does executive presence look like? How do I self advocate for myself? How do I show the work that I've been doing? I think it's really, really important for us to learn how to focus on that. I hear from my clients all of the time, if I advocate for myself or if I show the work that I'm doing, do I seem self-serving? What's wrong with being self-serving? What's wrong with saying these are all of the things that I've done and this is how I equate it to the business and this is how I've grown the business by X percentage or whatever. It isn't that you're being self-serving, it's that you can help develop and design the policies and processes that are needed to continue to grow the company. So I think that's really important for us to do.
Yeah. Listening to you, it's clear to me that all of us have these stories we tell ourselves, right? About what is okay to do, what's not okay to do. And we've had that reinforced a lot of times by what we've witnessed
Yeah.
with people around us and whether they've been rewarded or punished, in a sense, by what actions that they have taken. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what are some of the, because I think this relates to a number of people who are listening to my podcast, things that we tell ourselves that hold us back. And those are the kinds of things that you help your clients see more clearly so they can get past those. What do you see as some of these thoughts, beliefs, attitudes that some of these mid level managers hold to be true that really aren't? Like, how will I look?
Yeah. So how will I look? Am I going to be self-serving? Am I going to come across as if I am being too forceful, or am I going to come across as if I'm being too self-serving? We tell ourselves that I don't have the experience to do that, or I've never been in that room, or I've never had that stretch project. So what makes me think I'll be capable of doing this? We sabotage ourselves by our stinking thinking, right? That it just it isn't there. So if you've never had this stretch project, then you're never going to get to that point. So I think that I think that it's unfortunate that we tell ourselves these stories, or, I'm not a great communicator, so I'm not worthy of being able to stand up in front of people and have a conversation. I don't know how to create a PowerPoint presentation or present it in a way that's going to be impactful or strategic. So those are some of the things that we consistently tell ourselves as mid-level leaders. Or I don't have the support of my manager. I don't have the support of an executive level person who's going to champion me into these spaces. So once we get past that and we say to ourselves, I can do this. And even if I can't do this, there's nothing wrong with trying to do this in order to get you to where you want to be. If we don't try to do it, we will never, ever get there. So the idea is to put yourself out there and try it and just take those small steps, to be able to get there, and stop telling yourself what you're not capable of doing, because it's not true. It is simply not true. I mean, we teach ourselves, we as parents, we teach our kids, you can do anything that you want to do, and take the word can't out of your vocabulary because it doesn't exist. It's ridiculous. So stop saying what you cannot do and make the call, send the email, ask the question. Put yourself in a position to take that risk that you need to take in order to get there. Because if you don't, you won't, and you will never know, and you'll live in regret. And then we become resentful, right? We go to a job every single day that we don't like because we know we could do so much more, but because we didn't take that risk, or we didn't bet on ourselves, it hinders us.
You know, being a person who is not a person of color, as I am, I would love for you to share a little bit about what are some of the unique challenges that maybe you faced or that you see your clients facing as a person of color that will help those of us who are not persons of color to really better understand what we need to be aware of so that we don't inadvertently step on toes, create issues, put up more obstacles instead of opening opportunities.
Yeah, I love that question. I think that instead of stepping on toes or anything like that, it's access. What we lack as Black professionals is access, right? We don't necessarily get the opportunity to have the sponsors or the mentors that our white counterparts might have. So we don't have anybody coming to us and saying, "Hey, Ayana, I want you to sit in this board meeting with me just so you can hear what's going on, so you can develop the skill set needed once you get to that area." We don't necessarily have the people in those rooms, those decision makers who are in the rooms saying my name, saying, "I think Ayana can do this. I want to see her be able to do this project." Or, we don't have anyone saying, "I want to give you this stretch project. I know that it's going to be tough, but I'm here to support you." So more than stepping on toes and all of that, it's opening up access,
Mm.
being a true ally to say, I see something in this person, and I want to be somebody who can help develop that person of color, that Black person, to be able to do that. So it really, for me, is all about access. And I think that's for every professional, right? Every professional, regardless of their background, deserves to be evaluated based on their skills and their contributions. But for us, it's a little more difficult because we just lack that access. So, you know, that would be huge for a person
Thank
of color.
you. Okay, so the access, I'd love for you to talk about it from a couple of perspectives. One, your own experience with not having access. What did you do to create that for yourself? And then the second part will be, what are you doing to help your clients create that for themselves so
Yeah.
that they are able to get a mentor or a sponsor or someone who can provide that kind of access for them?
So for me, the first part of your question, I didn't know that I didn't have access until just recently. So I've gone 25 or so years as a corporate person that didn't have access. So because of that, and as I look back on my career, there was a lot of heartache, there was a lot of trauma, there was a lot of things that could have been done differently had I had access, had I had a mentor, had I had somebody take my hand and say, this is the way we want to do this. This is the way that you navigate the corporate spaces. I didn't have that, and I didn't know that until just recently. So as I thought back, I thought that's part of why I am such an advocate for mentorship and sponsorship, is because had I had it, I could have, I've done well. I've done really, really well, and I'm grateful for the position that I was in and that I'm in now. But it could have been very, very different in my approach to a lot of learnings and failures and trials. Could have been very different for me had I had that access and had I had those mentors on my side. So knowing what I know now and what I coach my client on is how to navigate those corporate spaces, what the culture looks like, and how you as a Black professional should show up, and how important having not one, not two, but I think, multiple mentors are important for you to have. And then having those sponsors. And the way to get those is building those relationships, asking the questions. So if there are C-suite folks out there that you see that are doing well, that you admire, that are in spaces that you want to be in, then you need to start to build relationships with those people. You need to go to them and, start to advocate for yourself. This is what I've done. This is my body of work. These are my plans. Ensure that your goals align with the company goals so that there is alignment and synergy there. And then you start working those relationships. The way that we grow as humans, we're not intended to do this life alone. So when you start to build those relationships and get close to those people, they will start to see what you can offer. And I that's what I coach my clients is, you're not going to get it. They're not coming to knock on your door. So you need to make sure that you're putting yourself out there. Start to build those.
Yeah, that's so important. And what's coming to mind for me is the word, you kind of started with as being your passion word, service. It seems to me that if I'm in a position where I want to approach someone to be a mentor or a sponsor, then wouldn't it also be important for me to look for ways I could be of service to that person? So it isn't just me asking them to help me, but I'm looking at ways to help them as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think that when you're in a corporate space, my service would be, how can I help you? So there's a mutual beneficial relationship. So if I know that I am aligned with what your goals are as a corporate executive, and I can help you with that, and then you can help me with that, absolutely. That's why I don't necessarily believe that you should get in relationship with someone who you're not in alignment with, because there is no synergy there and there is no reciprocation. It would be a one-way street, and I don't think that it would work. So you definitely want to seek out people where there's an alignment, where you're able to help them and they're able to help you, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Absolutely.
And what's also occurring to me at the moment is just thinking about how important it is to start observing early and noticing who's in alignment with you in terms of values and projects that they have working on where you could make a real contribution to their efforts. So it sounds like it requires some research
Mhm.
and you know, kind of this deep knowing about this other person. You're not just offhanded in approaching them, but you've thought it through. Because I have to think, and you tell me if I'm right about this, when you approach someone and they sense that you've done your homework and your research and you're coming from a place of genuine service, they can sense that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. You don't want to approach a person that you haven't done your research on. You don't want to approach a person and just say, listen, I know that you are X in the company. I want you to be my mentor. No, this has to be a relationship. And you don't necessarily go into relationship with people that you don't have anything in common with, whether it's a personal or a professional relationship. And you want it to be genuine. You want it to be from a place of service and a place of reciprocation. So it is something that you do over time. And I don't ever recommend anyone to immediately jump in on it. Watch them, pay attention to them. How do they show up at work? How do they show up with their employees? How do they show up to do their job? How do they, do they value the same things that you value? And if they don't, that may not be the person for you. And that's okay. But you definitely want to watch and pay attention first. And I don't think that the first conversation should be one of, I want you to be my mentor. It should be one of, I'd like to maybe pick your brain on something, or I'd like to take you to coffee, or I'd like to have a Zoom chat with you just to kind of find out what's going on. It shouldn't be one of, I need you to do something for me immediately. I think that that's the wrong approach.
For the person on the side of the who would be the mentor or the sponsor, what are some things that they could become, say, more aware of, you know, raise their radar around in looking for people who could benefit from being sponsored or mentored by, let's say, I'm the executive. What should I be paying attention to?
The way that they communicate, right? Communication is a really big deal. Are they strategic thinkers or are they very tactical? Are they high performers? Lots of companies, my last company I was in, we did something called a 9 box. And a 9 box is a performance management tool that places you somewhere on a box, a high performing box or a box where, you need some additional help. And I think a mentor can uh, work with any of those folks. Maybe a person who's not a high performer is probably in the right role, but maybe they don't have the right leader, or they're in the wrong role, or they're in the right role. They just, need a little extra help. But if you pay attention to the way they communicate, you pay attention to their strategy, you pay attention to them being a high performer, and they're still stuck in the same place year after year after year, that might be a person you say, I've seen you do some really good work and I've seen what you have to offer. And I saw that project you were on. I'd maybe like to mentor you. Are you somebody who is interested? Are you interested in having a mentor? Are you interested in having a sponsor? Because I think you have a lot to offer. So if as leaders, we're paying attention to the people around us, not just on our own teams, but internal in the company. Um, what are they doing? Are they really doing a good job, but they seem to be stuck in one place? That's your key to have a conversation with that person and see if you're one that can start that conversation of mentor. We're always looking for succession, right? Our succession plans as
Yes.
leaders is a big deal for us, especially when you get to that executive level. So we want to start building those people up years in advance, years in advance.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is really a responsibility of senior executives to be noticing and paying attention and then taking the initiative on their side to
Right.
reach out, as you were just suggesting, to those that they see have the potential, have opportunities, but maybe like you, they didn't know how to ask for or look for those kinds of access. that would really be helpful for them in their own growth and development. I know
Lots
in
of
your,
leaders,
yeah,
oh,
no, go
lots of
ahead.
leaders, lots of leaders, or some leaders also don't know how to do that, right? If you're a leader and you've gotten elevated because the company is scaling or whatever your situation is, and you're now the senior leader person who didn't go the traditional route, and you don't have leadership development courses and training, and you didn't yourself have a mentor or a sponsor, you just happened to get there because, of whatever reason. There's also that. So there's a lot of leaders out there who don't necessarily know how to grow their teams. Um, so there's another facet of that we have to think about. There's leaders who don't necessarily know how to lead, especially when a company begins to scale. So I might be an okay leader at, I don't know, a company of 150, 200 people, but then when we start to get 500, we start to get 1,000, responsibilities change, things change. We go from a startup, a very private company to now a big public company, where I have investors and board members and stakeholders, and things change and budgets change. We don't necessarily know how to grow ourselves, let alone our teams. So that's another piece of leadership that it also has to be evaluated when we start growing leaders and then growing leaders on our team. Like, I don't know how to
Yes.
do that.
Well, exactly. And that is why my podcast is focused on grow strong leaders from the perspective of growing myself as a leader, in addition to growing those around me. So you've just reinforced that beautifully, because I think that's so, essential. It's looking within, having the awareness of where I have opportunities to grow, in addition to looking outward at those around me and where do I have the opportunity to help them develop. Because, of course, what I have found is anytime we take on a role of helping someone else grow, we also grow and expand in the process because of
Yeah,
what we're learning, what we're having to, I guess, dig into from ourselves in order to be fully present with this other person
yeah.
and be of service to them, and as well as looking at how they can, provide service to me in a given moment. I know one of
That's
the
why I
things.
think that's
Go
why I
ahead.
think that having a diverse group of people is important, because when we surround ourselves with diversity of thought, diversity of experiences, it helps us grow as well. It really reinforces the idea that if I want to continue to learn and grow as a human, as a leader, as whatever, I need to surround myself with people who think differently than I do. So the notion that um, diverse people don't have anything to offer or are not good leaders is not true. Because if we are actively learning and leaning into our own growth, we want to be able to grow and take something from every single person that we meet, regardless to where they come from or what their background is. There's always something that you can learn from someone. So having that diversity in there, be it from people of color, be it from women, be it from gender specific folks, it's a learning that we should love to do and help ourselves grow in that.
Well, I know that, speaking of that, one of the things that you have been really committed to is what you called reshaping the narrative around Black talent in corporate leadership. And I'd love to know, what's your perception of the current narrative and what is it that you feel needs shifting in that area?
Yeah, I think that not I think, the current narrative is that Black professionals are diversity hires, right? You're only here because you look a particular way. And we said that we were going to hire X number of diversity hires. So that's why you're here, not necessarily because you are qualified to do the job, but because of the color of your skin. And that's a very dangerous place for us to live, right? For this country to live in, thinking that people are not qualified to do the job. The first thing that we have to understand is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not about hiring underqualified people. It's about casting a wider net, right? So that I am able to find the best qualified people all over the place. So it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your sexual orientation. It's I am casting a wide net because I want to find the very best people to do the job that I have open to doing. So the current narrative is that we have to dumb our businesses down in order to hire, diverse candidates, and that's ridiculous. The narrative should be, I want to hire the best possible people that are qualified to do the job. And I really wish that is what more people would focus on. It isn't taking something away from anybody else. We don't want to remove, chairs from the table. We want to add to it because, again, having that diverse perspective only makes us better. So, I want to change that narrative that hiring Black and people of color equals I'm hiring unqualified people because I gotta fill a quota. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't be filling quotas. That in itself is ridiculous. We should be really looking for the best possible people. So widening the talent pool. And that means if you're only looking in one particular place, so I'm just going to pick on LinkedIn just because it's easy. If I'm only looking at LinkedIn to find qualified candidates, and all of the qualified candidates on LinkedIn look exactly the same, have the same background, come from the same place, go to the same school, how am I getting diversity of thought? How am I bringing that into my company where there is a different perspective? Versus maybe I do look on LinkedIn and I get some candidates from LinkedIn, and then I look on a place called HBCU Connect where there, are Black folks who went to historically Black colleges, and then I look on I think it's called Shoplo, which is where Latinx and Native Americans post their resumes at. And so then I have now broadened my net of people. So I've got a group of folks that I can go through and I can start to see where the best possible candidate is. I may not hire anybody from Joplo. I may not hire anyone from HBCU Connect, but at least my goal was to find the best possible candidates to do that. So I want us to think about that versus, I gotta hire this person who's just not qualified to do the job. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned those other sites, and I'd love for you to send those to me so we can put those in the show notes to give
Yeah.
people ideas of other places where they might be looking for candidates. Because one of the things I was wondering as you were talking about, a wider net is where do we cast that? And you've given us two great resources for that. Are there any other things that you've seen companies do well in terms of casting that net in a broader way other than what they've traditionally done? How have they expanded that?
Well, it's the internal. So if you already have a great group of diverse candidates internally, that's where you want to start, right? That's where you want to start to really make sure that you are working with your employee resource groups, your ERGs. So most companies have, a Hispanic, a Latinx ERG. Most companies have, mom ERGs because, that's a diverse group of people, right? Most companies have Black ERGs, Asian ERGs. So being a person who's an advocate for mid-career leaders, I want you to start internally. I want you to start growing those people internally to promote those folks first. And then you go out and then you go to different websites to cast that wider net. But if we focus internally on growing those leaders, then that's where we can really start to get some good talent, homegrown talent from.
Makes so much sense uh, to not overlook our own talent pool. And one of the other things, Ayana, that you had talked with me about before that I found fascinating is this whole idea of stay interviews,
Yeah,
STAY. So, would
yeah.
you talk about that? What is it and why? What's the purpose of that? Why is it important?
Yeah. So a stay interview is a proactive conversation between employees and leaders that's designed to understand what keeps employees engaged. So much like an exit interview, when a person is leaving the company, you get all of your information about why are you leaving? What could we have done differently? Blah, blah, blah. We don't want to do that. We don't want you to leave. We want you to stay. So since you are here, how can we get you to stay? What are we doing well? What would make you leave? What are some things that we need to change in order to make sure that our strong employee base continues to stay where we need them to stay? It is an incredibly competitive market right now, especially for employees. And if we make sure that we're keeping the employees who are making an impact in our company and having those stay interviews to ask what's working and to identify what's not and what the employee needs to thrive, then I think that's half the battle there. Don't wait till they're on their way out the door to ask
Yeah.
what can we do different.
Why do you think more companies don't do stay interviews?
I think it's just time, right? We don't have time. Some of us are so overworked and we don't have time. I don't believe that no manager doesn't want to do them. It's just one, how do I do them? When do I do them? And then like what am I supposed to stay? What am I supposed to say? Perhaps I'm not in a position to give them the employee what it is that they're looking for. But I think most of the time employees just want to be heard. So if you hear them and you see them and you make small incremental changes that are possible, I think that they're okay with that. But if we do nothing and we put blinders on and we ignore all of the foolishness that's going on around us, then we risk losing them. So I do think that it has a lot to do with just time, bandwidth, how can I make a change? You know, I so we've got to prioritize our employees. We must prioritize the people who do the work.
Mhm. And I'm assuming that a stay interview, you would recommend it's the person's manager who would conduct that ideally, or is there someone else that you've seen does that well?
No, I mean I've seen HR do it, but I think it's more impactful if it's coming from the manager. Yeah. And a stay interview can happen in your weekly or biweekly one-on-ones. I think if every manager is not doing a one-on-one with their employee, then that's a mistake. But you can build that into your one-on-one. It doesn't have to be done every week, but maybe once a quarter during your one-on-one, you have that conversation about let's talk about what's going well. Let's talk about what we can do differently. Let's talk about where your next move is. So in that one-on-one conversation, lots of things can happen. You could talk about career development. You could talk about the stay interview. You could talk about what's next on the goal agenda. You can talk about your KPIs. You can do all of those things in those interviews. But it's a key part of what your leadership style needs to be as a manager.
Mhm. And you just touched on something, Ayana, that I know is core to the work that you're doing now with clients, and that is this whole thing of career development. And I would love to know what's your approach, because I think what you do with clients, some managers could also do with their own employees. Talk a little bit about your approach when you're working with a client and you're trying to find out where are they in thinking about their careers and where they might want to go.
Mhm. So I like to kind of work backwards. So if my goal is to be a CEO of a company, how do I need to get there? what are the steps that I need to take in order to get there? I need to know how to be a strategic thinker. I need to know how to lead a team. I need to know some finance piece. I need to know how to speak to investors, to communicate well. So it really depends on what the particular client needs or wants. Where do you want to go? And then from there, we start to build a strategy. And I just find that it works if we work backwards in saying like this is who you want to be, and what are the things that are going to help you get to there,
Hmm.
to that particular spot. Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, in your work with clients, are there certain things that you see as recurring patterns that are kind of getting in their way of seeing where they might want to go, or thinking big enough to allow themselves to really look at what's possible for them? Or are they sometimes more limited in their thinking?
Great question. Most of the time, they're limited in their thinking. So if they're coming to me or some sort of a leadership development coach, it's because they lack, probably confidence is the biggest thing. And they continue to go back to what we talked about in the beginning, is their stinking thinking. I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, instead of really thinking about the possibilities of what you can do. So my role, and I like to coach the person versus the problem. So we start to think about, why is it that you don't have confidence? What has happened that has given you the idea that you can't do this? And we start to work through that, because it is very much a, I don't think that I'm going to get this role because I have never done this, or I can't do that. And they don't allow themselves to see what the possibilities are. So I really like to take them on a journey where we think about the transformation. This is where you are, and this is the road we're going to go down. And at the end of that road, this is what you're going to be. So helping them imagine and envision where they're going to be after the 6 weeks, 12 weeks, or however long it takes us to get to that point is going to be. And that is when the real kind of transformational work starts to work for the client, is let's envision it. So part of the practice is not diving deep into creating a development plan right away. It's creating the vision. This is where you want to be. Then I get clients that say, I want to do, they want to do 52 things. And I'm like, 52 things are fantastic. I want you to do 52 things too. However, that's not scalable and it doesn't make sense. So let's pick three. What is it that you really want to do? Do you want flexibility? Do you want money? Do you want impact? Do you want influence? What is it that you really, really want? And let's start working on those things. And then we start to build what that journey looks like, and that transformation. We create the narrative and the story. And at the end of that story, like, this is fantastic. I could do all of these things 100%. So then we start to get to work. So we've got to get them to believe that they can do this first, because they come to me like, I can't do it. Of course you can. Let's think about how you can.
Well, I love that approach of getting them to really picture themselves being there. So it
Yeah,
brings it to life for them. And then they can step into that in terms of
exactly.
actions that they're willing to take. Because I think you're so right. It's a great preliminary step to getting them to start trying new things
Yeah.
instead of just let's start. So that's so cool. This has been such a great conversation, Ayana. Thank you for bringing your wisdom, your experiences to my audience today, because it's such an important topic. How do we really give people of all different backgrounds the opportunities to grow and thrive in the workplace and as human beings?
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to share with my listeners how they can connect with you on social media, your website, and learn more about your work.
Yeah. So I am always on LinkedIn. I am Ayana Carroll on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram at ARC Consulting. And my website is go.arccoachconsulting.com, where you can find all of the information you need about me. And I really would encourage your listeners to connect with me on LinkedIn, because I do give tips and tricks about leadership growth and development there. So if they, if they're curious about something, then chances are I've already posted about it, and I've given little advice on how to grow in whatever particular area they're looking to grow in. So connect with me. I'm happy to chat with you. I'm very active on it, so I look forward to it.
Great. Well, thank you, Ayana, for sharing the resources that you have, especially there on LinkedIn, for people who are, and all my listeners are, or else they wouldn't be listening to my show. They're interested in growing as a leader. So I love the fact that you've provided so much information right there on LinkedIn, and I know on your website as well. And I would encourage my audience to check that out. We'll also include the links on your show notes page to your LinkedIn profile, your website, and the other two sites that you mentioned for checking out for jobs or potential candidates for specific positions. Thank you again, Ayana, for being with me today. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I admire you and the work that you're doing. It's so important. So thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. I appreciate you.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out the powerful tools we've created to help leaders strengthen their character and communication skills. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.